Shalom and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this programme today we'll be discussing the outrageous and immoral decision by the International Criminal Court to issue an international arrest warrant for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, together with the former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant, and also this government's complicity in support of the ICC and marking the 75th anniversary of Magen David Adom. Quite a programme. And I've got quite a guest to cover these extensive topics in Steven Jaffe, not only a friend of the Middle East Report, but a friend of this channel as well. So, Steven, great to have you back on the Middle East Report.
Well, wonderful to be here, Simon. The context and the circumstances may not be as we would like it, but I really deeply appreciate the support and the platform that the channel and the programme gives to representatives of the Jewish community in particular at a time which is very fraught for us.
No, it's a pleasure and it's the honour of my life, as you know. Steven, just share with us what you and your family are going through in North London right now, particularly this time of unprecedented rise of Jew hatred, where we know that your community is sadly under attack, and this is where Christians need to be more vocal, but also just to ask that simple question to their Jewish friends or neighbours or work colleagues. How are you?
Well, thank you for asking, Simon. And that reaching out to members of the Jewish community is absolutely vital, because many in the community feel very alone, and we've felt that way now since October of last year. It's a time of great anxiety within the Jewish community. We've seen large crowds in our cities calling for Israel's destruction, but also crucially calling for what they call globalizing the Intifada. Well, what does that mean? It means bringing violence onto our streets. And the Jewish community is the target frequently of violent attacks. We've seen it in Amsterdam, we've seen it in Montreal, we saw an incident this weekend in London. So there is a lot of violence now being directed against the Jewish community, and that sense of fear is palpable. So I think it is a very disturbing time to be Jewish in the UK, and I think it is time for our Christian friends really to reach out and show that support, which is so much appreciated.
No, absolutely. And Steven, it was great to see you at the Magen David Adom UK annual dinner in London on Monday, which was inspirational. And I was very impressed with the Israeli Olympic athlete who won gold, who was one of the speakers, together with Israel's former ambassador to the UN as well. Just share with us your thoughts on what an inspirational evening it was and the incredible work being done in saving lives in Israel by Magen David Adom.
Well, it was a great evening, Simon. We were celebrating 75 years of Magen David Adom here in the UK, and it was a coming together because we had a large Christian presence at that event, together with representatives from all sections of the Jewish community in the UK. So it was a great gathering of support. The place was packed, and of course you're right, Magen David Adom is at the moment it's a frontline force for Israel in saving lives. We have just come to a ceasefire in Lebanon, but the missiles and the rockets that were being fired into Israel were targeting civilian areas. And unfortunately, some of them hit, and Magen David Adom has to be ready and prepared 24/7 to respond to all manner of incidents. It could be a terrorist attack, it could be, as I've said, as a result of missile attacks on Israel. So they've been at full alert. It's at a huge cost in human terms to keep every medical vehicle staffed by paramedics 24/7. That's a big undertaking. And thankfully, we have the support of friends of Israel from across the world who want to stand with Israel in a practical way. And Magen David Adom is a perfect platform for it. And thank God we can show a practical support to the Israeli people by supporting the work of Magen David Adom to save lives.
No,
what
absolutely.
could be more important than that?
Of course, and Steven, I mean, Magen David Adom, or MDA, or as Israelis call it, Marder, has celebrated its 75th anniversary. Share with us the real significance and the legacy of 75 years of defending and protecting the State of Israel through Israel's National Emergency Service that existed prior to the modern State of Israel.
Yes, so absolutely right, predates the State of Israel itself. The job of Magen David Adom throughout has been to save lives, and it brings together every section of Israeli society, and that is a remarkable thing to see. Jews from the religious side of the community, secular side, the left, the right, it's a very divided community, but beyond the Jewish community as well, to Israeli citizens, Christians, Muslims, Druze, all volunteering for Magen David Adom. It's the country's largest volunteer society, is a remarkable thing, and it's a vision for Israel and its future and its resilience and its ability to come together. That is vital at this time, and Magen David Adom has waved the flag of Israel, the Red Star of David, that's what it means, has flown around the world wherever there has been need. So in the past, whether there was an earthquake in Haiti or a volcano in Guatemala or a tsunami in Indonesia, Magen David Adom was one of the first national medical emergency services to dispatch people to save lives. It wasn't about politics, it's purely humanitarian. And I think we all feel pride, whether we are Jewish, Christian, as friends of Israel, to see that Red Star of David flying alongside the Red Cross wherever it is needed. And that is a tremendous role that it's taken on behalf of a small country, which plays an enormous role in humanitarian work. And obviously our media here in the UK and the West isn't particularly interested in that. It's not a story that they want to feature, but what you sensed in that room at the MDA dinner was an enormous sense of pride as to what has been achieved in Israel. It's a state-of-the-art medical emergency service. Wherever you are in Israel, they can reach you on average in 6 minutes. That's whether you're in the old city of Jerusalem and all the alleyways there, or whether you're in the center of Tel Aviv with dreadful traffic, well, they'll come with motorbikes, or if you're in the middle of the Negev desert, that they can get a helicopter to you very, very quickly. So it's an amazing service which has developed so much as Israel has during its existence.
And Stephen, just tell us how has the MDA responded to the horrors of October the 7th, considering this was the biggest mass terrorist attack by Hamas in Israel's history. We're looking at 1,200 deaths, 250 taken as hostages into Gaza, and then 6,000 or 7,000 injured. And also the fact that Israel's had to then mobilise in the region of 390,000 reservists to fight against Hamas and against Hezbollah. Just share with us how MDA has responded to the challenges posed by October the 7th, also acknowledging the fact that many paramedics were also murdered on that day, and many wouldn't be alive today if it wasn't for their ambulances being armour-plated.
Absolutely, absolutely. So to give the viewers some context, I mean, you mentioned 1,200 people were murdered on that day. If you look at the population of Israel and compare it to the population of the UK, it's as if 15,000 people were murdered in a single day. You can imagine what would happen to the emergency services in the UK facing that extent of atrocity. The numbers of injured, of course, even greater. You're right, we lost 12 paramedics who were murdered in that day. We had a similar number of ambulances that were destroyed. The organisation's basic life-saving equipment was severely depleted because of the extent of the atrocities. You will have seen the new blood bank that Magen David Adom has. It's a national facility. It's state-of-the-art. It was due to open 2 days after the Hamas attack. That was to be the grand opening. We were very concerned whether the blood facilities would stand up to the unprecedented need for blood, because this was such a new facility that was not even officially opened yet. Thank God it did, and Israel did not need to call for blood to be brought from other countries. It was able to deal with that. But that shows the extent of what was inflicted on that day, and how Magen David Adom was almost brought to its knees by the sheer extent of the atrocity. We launched an emergency appeal immediately on that day that went out to the world, thanks to remarkable response to that appeal coming from the Jewish community globally, but also beyond the Jewish community here in the UK. I can point to the fact that there was a Bible group on the Shetland Islands that supported that emergency appeal. There were a group of churches on the island of Jersey who happened to be meeting during the Festival of Tabernacles when the Hamas attack took place, and they devoted what they raised that day to Magen David Adom. From Shetlands to Jersey and every place in between, a remarkable response, and that has helped Magen David Adom to not just replace all the ambulances that were destroyed, but to much increase its ambulance fleet and its resources, because it has to be ready for the next crisis that Israel was to experience. And we knew that Hezbollah had the capacity to rain down missiles into Israel. Thankfully, that capacity was greatly degraded, as we all know, by various actions that Israel took. But it was a major threat, and still is, and Israel relies on Magen David Adom to be able to deal with that threat, and thank God it has, thanks in no small measure to the support that we get from Friends of Israel around the world. So it has made a huge difference in saving lives. An organisation that was deeply traumatised as well, you know, people, youngsters in the MDA dispatch centre speaking directly to people in the kibbutzim near Gaza that had been overrun by Hamas terrorists, speaking to their colleagues up to the point where they were murdered. You can imagine the deep, deep trauma that has left behind. So yes, very deeply impacted, but the organisation has emerged stronger, as Israel has, more resilient, more capable, and thank God for that.
Yeah, praise God. Thank you for that update. So let's have a look at this absolutely a remarkable story, inspirational story, in fact, from an Israeli paramedic belonging to MDA. And this is his story of what happened on October the 7th. And this was exclusively shown at the MDA dinner in the UK as the MDA marks its 75th anniversary in saving lives in Israel.
I became a paramedic because I love to treating people and I love to help people. On October 6th, I was just chilling at home with my wife and my kids and get ready to evening and night shift on the bulletproof ambulance. A regular shift. We went to sleep at 11. 6:29, the dispatch call us. They say there is a war outside, so we start to go to the south. And when we get there, we saw a car. The driver told me that he have 3 injured from bullets. We take him to the ambulance and start to stop bleeding and give him IV medications. The rockets fall next to us. It was crazy. We cleaning the ambulance from the blood. The rockets fell on the synagogue, and I took from there like someone, his leg was blown off, seriously injured in his head, and I put a tourniquet on his leg. The bleeding stops, and took him to Barzilai Hospital again. I supposed to go home at 3. They need me there. So I stayed there until 11 at night. And all of the day, it was like that. Like we treated critically injured patients all the time. When I saw the terrorists shoot on us and the rockets fell next to us, so I called her and I told her, my love, I don't know if I'm gonna make it. So my wife started to cry. If I didn't have a bulletproof ambulance on October 7, I couldn't save so many lives. The bullets flew over our heads, and it was bad. It was when I went out from the ambulance to take the patients. I felt really saved in the bulletproof ambulance that day.
I was going to the festival, to the Nova, and because of the racket and everything, we turned the car away. In 6:40, we arrived in front of a jeep of terrorists that do like this, shoot all my car and turn, and I get 2 bullets in my back. I get out of the car with my friends and we run 2 kilometers to Sderot with a friend of mine. I feel I'm bleeding inside. I have hard to breathe. I tell to my friend, I looked at them and I said, Meron, we need to get out. I feel that I will be dead in a few minutes. Terrorists started to shoot at us, and after I looked and I said, Lior, I see Lior coming with the ambulance, smiling at me, say, get in the ambulance, and I received medicine. And it's not just in the incident there, it was after also Lior really take care of me and enter in my heart. And in the end, when I needed the help, the people that was there, it's Magen David Adom. And for me, it's everything. And amazing that we have people like Lior. And thank you, man, I love you.
Love you. Love you, brother. October 7 changed who I am 100%. I feel the pain all the time. We risk our life to save people. This is my only comfort, that we save a lot of lives.
So thank you, MDA, for saving lives in Israel as the organisation marks its 75th anniversary as Israel's national emergency service. Moving on now, Stephen, to talk about the immoral and absolutely outrageous decision by the International Criminal Court in The Hague to issue an arrest warrant last week for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant. Share with us your thoughts on this absolutely outrageous and shocking decision by the ICC against Israel.
Yeah, outrageous and shocking, yes, but also unexpected, no, because this has been building up for years. This is part of the Hamas armoury, if you like. It's a great victory that they will see and a great encouragement to Hamas to use international bodies, the United Nations, the UN Human Rights Council, and now the International Criminal Court. It is part of a strategy that we have seen and noticed for a very long time. So it's come to a head, that's for sure. The court, I believe, has overreached itself legally. It's acted in a way which I believe will bring a great deal of pressure on it from right-minded thinking people and governments. And I believe it's brought to a head something which has been a feature really for years, which is really the treatment of Israel as the Jew amongst the nations. So in the past, it was the Jewish people you could demonize directly and stigmatize, but now the focus is on the Jewish state. And it's a blood libel which in the past was cast on Jewish individuals and Jewish communities, and it's now cast against the Jewish state that is, a child-killing, genocidal entity. This is the culmination of a lot of effort put in by hostile states and by malign actors. And it is deeply concerning, but I do believe that there's going to be a lot of kickback against the court that we'll see as well.
There will be once Trump takes office again in January. But share with us what this means practically for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, knowing that those countries that have signed up to the International Criminal Court means that if the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu were to fly to London or to fly to France or another country, he could actually be arrested despite the fact that he has diplomatic immunity. But share with us the real consequences for the Israeli Prime Minister of this international arrest warrant going out for his arrest on what is considered kind of alleged war crimes?
Well, I'm sure you'll show some clips of Benjamin Netanyahu speaking as part of the programme, and he is defiant, of course, and very eloquently has made the case that he has compared it to a very infamous case involving a French captain called Dreyfus. And this goes back to the point I was making, that it's stigmatizing the Jewish state in a way that previously the individuals were cast as traitors in the case of Dreyfus. And that's how Netanyahu sees it, that this is a unwarranted and malign attack, which is rooted in a kind of an anti-Semitic ethos of seeing the Jewish people in the absolute worst light. So he will come out fighting. In practical terms, well, I think yes, he's got to bear in mind and very carefully consider where he visits. I think this is a great problem, because if we're going to see a better Middle East, a better future, the Prime Minister needs to have the ability to travel, to meet governments, and I think as I've said, Hamas will see this as a huge victory if that right of Israel to Israel's Prime Minister to travel and negotiate directly with governments is seen to have been undermined by the action of this court. So I think that is a disturbing aspect.
Also, share with us, Stephen, the fact that the International Criminal Court in The Hague have placed a kind of a moral equivalency with Hamas leaders and that of Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, and the former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant, as if these are on the same moral level. So on the one hand, we have Hamas as a genocidal Islamist terrorist organisation that subjugate and their own people and actually build up a whole terror network of terror tunnels, rockets and missiles. And we saw what they did on October the 7th. And then you compare that to Israel, which is a modern democratic nation state that is actually abides by the rule of law. And when its actions are taken against Hamas, is only doing that in self-defense, whilst it's Hamas that committed the genocide. So why hasn't the ICC even issued an arrest warrant for Sinwar, knowing that he was the architect? Thankfully, the Israelis carried out the justice on him, who was the architect of October the 7th.
So it's absolutely correct that this is an attack on a democracy, and that is unprecedented by the ICC. They've never gone against a democratic state before, and there's a very good reason for that, because it's part of their framework is that a nation should have the ability to investigate and deal with allegations through its own judiciary, particularly where it's an independent court, which is certainly the case in Israel. So the fact that the ICC has gone directly against the leader of a democratic state is a very deliberate and a very political act, which takes it way beyond its own framework. So that is, it's deliberate. They've done it knowingly, but you're right. They haven't issued warrants against, for example, other neighbouring governments. Assad comes to mind in Syria, who's massacred, in the civil war. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of dead. And let's go to the heart of it. Let's go to the Iranian regime, a regime which, of course, oppresses its own people, but has been complicit in acts of war and violence across the Middle East and indeed as far as Argentina and Europe. And yet the Iranian regime somehow doesn't face censure from the ICC. So rank hypocrisy and exceeding its own powers in going against a democratic state with its own robust judiciary and courts. So that is an important point.
Also, it's important to note as well that no mention has also been made of the plight of the hostages either, as if the hostages are irrelevant or don't actually equate to much in the thinking of the International Criminal Court. So share with us how they haven't even taken this into consideration. And if they were really serious about combating genocide and war crimes, then surely they need to bring prosecutions against Hamas in Gaza and its leaders, but also the Qataris who actually back Hamas in the first place, maybe even the Turks as well, under President Erdogan, who are big supporters of Hamas as well.
Well, there'd be no end to it. The Lebanese government has Hezbollah as an element within the government of Lebanon. Yes, they could all be indicted, that's for sure, but they won't, because Israel is being targeted in a very political fashion using legal means. And, the United Nations would be another example of this kind of global organizations which, ironically were set up in the aftermath of the Holocaust. The idea of international law and the United Nations was set up as a result of that. But now it has been hijacked and abused in order to become an instrument in the hands of those who wish to eradicate Israel. And why is that the case? Well, it's not secret. It's nothing very difficult to comprehend. There are over 50 Muslim states in the world. There are over 20 members of the Arab League. That gives them a major input in any global organization. And many other states with basket case human rights records who go alongside them, from North Korea to Venezuela, who give an automatic majority and a great deal of clout in these international organizations. Let's talk about the United Nations Human Rights Group, which is staffed by the likes of Saudi Arabia, which is chairing there when they're looking at women's rights in the world. Saudi Arabia has been given a major role at the United Nations in that. Iran has been part of the Human Rights Network in the United Nations as well. This is the rank hypocrisy, and how something which was set up, I believe, with good intentions, has, because of the nature of the world we live in, with so many states under despotic, autocratic regimes, and Israel being one state, and the Arab world being 22, and the Muslim world being over 50, well, it's not really surprising that international bodies are used and abused as a means to eradicate the state of Israel, and that is indeed what we're talking about.
So let's see this excellent CBN news report that actually reports on the fact that the ICC, the International Criminal Court in The Hague, has issued an international arrest warrant for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
The warrants accuse Netanyahu and Gallant of war crimes and crimes against humanity over the war in Gaza, and Hamas for the October 7th attacks that triggered Israel's offensive. The ICC decision would put Netanyahu and Gallant at risk of arrest if they traveled to certain countries. Back in May, when the ICC threatened arrest warrants, Netanyahu called it a moral outrage of historic proportions. The warrants come as Israel fights wars on its southern border with Hamas and Hezbollah in Lebanon. On Wednesday, U.S. negotiator Amos Hochstein concluded talks with Lebanon's Speaker of the Parliament.
If we made progress, I would go to Israel and make those additional discussions there based on the conversations here and see what we can do.
A major sticking point is Hezbollah's demand that Israel can't respond to violations by the terror group.
It is not allowed for Israel to violate and kill and enter whenever it wants.
Israel's new foreign minister says they must have that right.
We will need to keep the freedom of to act if there will be violations.
Sa'ar says Israel must be able to keep Hezbollah from ever again becoming a huge threat.
We will have to enforce that they won't be able to build again their force in Lebanon. They won't be able to bring again ammunition, missiles.
While Hochstein would not discuss details of the agreement, Middle East analyst Lee Smith tells CBN News it would underwrite the Lebanese army that's been infiltrated by Hezbollah.
We're talking about an additional $400 million for the Lebanese armed forces, in addition to the hundreds of millions that we have now decided to give them yearly. What we're doing is we're paying a Hezbollah asset.
Smith says the deal favors Hezbollah.
It not only protects an Iranian proxy, the chief Iranian proxy, Hezbollah, what it also does is it also it stiffs the American taxpayer. We call it funding for Lebanon. It's not funding for Lebanon. It's funding for Hezbollah.
At the UN Wednesday, the U.S. vetoed a Security Council resolution demanding an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire in Gaza.
We made clear throughout negotiations we could not support an unconditional ceasefire that failed to release the hostages.
Israel points out Hamas can easily end the war.
If Hamas were to release the hostages and surrender their weapons, not one more shot would need to be fired.
In the U.S. Senate, an effort by progressives to end sales of offensive weapons to Israel went down to a solid defeat. Opponents said it would send the wrong signal.
This signal will be seen by the enemies of Israel and the enemies of peace as if they just stick with it, they will win.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
And I think we can see through the excellent report from CBN that the International Criminal Court are showing their true colours, that this is nothing but a kangaroo court and they are on a witch hunt against Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East that actually is the only nation in the Middle East that truly cares about human rights. Show us some of the alleged crimes that Israel has supposed to be have committed. I mean, I think the International Criminal Court in The Hague have said that Israel is responsible for committing war crimes of genocide against the residents of Gaza, including starving the residents of Gaza. Now, I personally, Stephen, have seen the horrors of October the 7th. I've seen the kibbutzes that were destroyed. I've seen the cars that were destroyed. I've met survivors of those who survived October the 7th. I've met the families of the hostages. And if this had been the United States, and if the United States had gone through a similar experience that Israel did on October the 7th, they wouldn't care about the human rights of the residents of Gaza. They would literally carpet bomb the place. As they've done in previous wars. But the Jewish people have a different standard. So share with us how that Israel has been supplying international aid convoys into Gaza and helping helping the residents of Gaza. But the reality is that the International Criminal Court are only hearing one side of the story, and that story is from Hamas.
Exactly. The sources for the indictment, firstly, they haven't been published. We've only seen a summary, and every source used is from Hamas or indeed organisations closely associated with Hamas. Certainly no effort has been made by the court to analyse those accusations or to take on board Israel's response, which, as you've said, throughout the war has been unprecedented in terms of an urban warfare, most difficult scenario that any army faces in order to protect civilian lives. And that's not me speaking, that's someone like Colonel Richard Kemp, who's a senior military man, who's commanded forces in Afghanistan and British forces, and what he said is that he didn't have the resources at his disposal to safeguard civilians the way that Israel has and uses in Gaza. So he says that Israel's efforts to save lives has been unprecedented in terms of urban warfare. Israel has telegraphed, it's said to the people of Gaza where it's going to strike next, and given a humanitarian corridor to enable the civilian population to leave. That means there is no element of surprise in Israel's military operations in Gaza. They've had to say in advance, often days or weeks in advance, that where they're going to move next. And that is unheard of in warfare. So in terms of the allegation of starvation, Israel can produce statistics as to the amount of foodstuffs that gets into Gaza, the amount of medical aid. They can talk about the tonnage of that, 40,000 vehicles, whatever the statistics are. It doesn't mean much to us because how do we gauge it? But the fact is, for example, Israel has overseen a polio vaccination of the appropriate sections of the Palestinian population in Gaza. That is not the act of a genocidal intent. Quite the opposite is to safeguard civilian lives as best they can in a situation where Hamas have had 18 years to prepare for an Israeli land incursion. So with booby-trap buildings, with tunnelling in Gaza, which is longer than the London Underground, for example.
300 miles.
And does Hamas allow its civilians into those tunnels to be safe during this war? No, it's only Hamas fighters who take to the tunnels and hold out there. They don't allow their own civilian population in. We've seen Hamas also attack the aid that's going into Gaza. We've seen criminal gangs attack, but principally Hamas. It's their biggest earner at the moment, is to get hold of the food that's going into Gaza and then sell it on and tax their own population. So if the International Criminal Court wants to look about the fact of food insecurity in a war zone, well, they need to look at Hamas and what Hamas have done repeatedly to attack, including killing Israeli soldiers at crossing points in order to make it as difficult as possible for for aid to get in. And this is an important point. It's not just that Israel's taken unprecedented steps to safeguard civilian life, is that Hamas is conducting this war in an unprecedented way in order for its own civilians to be killed. That is how it then turns to the world and says, help us because civilians are being killed. Their use of human shields is systematic, and that is what they've been up to since October of last year in an unprecedented way. For them, victory is to survive. Hamas to survive, and they don't care how many of their own citizens.
And of course, this is a way of them making billions. So
yeah,
the fact is that if there is a war with Israel, and that's what they want, the billions flow into their pockets. And we've already seen that in Qatar, the leadership of Hamas, who now, thankfully, now Trump has been re-elected, the Qataris have kicked Hamas out of Qatar with their billions, and the leaders.
They have personal fortunes of billions. It's not that it's the movement's money, it's in their own pockets. And where did that money come from? Well, it came largely from Western governments who have just thrown aid into Gaza and into the Palestinian Authority. It's come through UNRWA, the UN agency which supposedly looks after the interests of the Palestinian refugees, but actually is concerned with perpetuating the problem of the Palestinian refugees. So the money flowing in is huge. You've mentioned also Qatar and Turkey, which are obviously big players with huge amounts of money. So the corruption in Hamas is astounding at its leadership levels.
Absolutely. But show us how, that the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court in The Hague, Karim Khan, is actually pursuing his own kind of personal agenda here by going after the Israeli Prime Minister. Because, there are other situations of war crimes that have been committed. We only have to look at Yemen. As you mentioned, we have to look at Syria. We can also see, for example, ISIS, that ISIS has never, and the leaders of ISIS have never been brought before the International Criminal Court for war crimes. Just share with us how this seems to be a personal vendetta against the Israeli Prime Minister, and certainly by the British lawyer Karim Khan.
So I don't know enough about him personally, but I can tell you that this is, politically driven. It's not legally driven. I've mentioned, the very rudimentary case that's been put, the fact that the prosecutor has asked the court not to take into account Israel's evidence, the fact that he's completely ignored the point of jurisdiction, which is that the International Criminal Court doesn't have jurisdiction to states that haven't signed the Treaty of Rome, which is the foundation of the criminal court. So he's gone against every legal principle after legal principle, which is his calling as a prosecutor, and instead he's waging a highly political war. He has his own problems. There have been allegations made against him personally. We know that. So he's a man in a hurry. That seems to be the case from my perception of it. He's forgotten the fact that he has actually got a legal position with a legal framework and just gone for Israel because it's popular, because it will go down well with the many states, as I've mentioned, who are hostile to Israel. He knows it's popular, and so there may be all sorts of personal factors, but this is a political and not principally a legal response.
So let's have a look now at the Israeli Prime Minister's robust response to the international arrest warrant for his arrest by the International Criminal Court in The Hague.
The anti-Semitic decision of the International Court in The Hague is a modern Dreyfus trial, and it will end the same way. 130 years ago, the French Jewish officer Alfred Dreyfus was falsely accused of treason by a biased French court. In response to these false accusations, the great French writer Émile Zola wrote his monumental essay, J'accuse. He accused the French court of anti-Semitic lies against an innocent officer who was later exonerated of all guilt. Now an international court in The Hague, also headed by a French judge, is repeating this outrageous offense. It is falsely accusing me, the democratically elected Prime Minister of the State of Israel, and Israel's former Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant, of deliberately targeting civilians. This when we do everything in our power to avoid civilian casualties. We issue millions of text messages, phone calls, leaflets to the citizens of Gaza to get them out of harm's way, while the Hamas terrorists do everything in their power to keep them in harm's way, including shooting them, using them as human shields. The court in The Hague accuses us of a deliberate policy of starvation. This when we've supplied Gaza with 700,000 tons of food to feed the people of Gaza. That's 3,200 calories for every man, woman, and child in Gaza. And these supplies are routinely looted by Hamas terrorists who deprive their people of much-needed food. Yet just in the last few weeks, Israel facilitated the vaccination of 97% of the people of Gaza against polio. This doesn't prevent the court of accusing us of genocide. What in God's name are they talking about in The Hague? The truth is simple. No war is more just than the war that Israel has been waging in Gaza after Hamas attacked us unprovoked, launching the worst massacre against the Jewish people since the Holocaust. The decision to issue an arrest warrant against me, the democratically elected Prime Minister of the State of Israel, and our former Defense Minister, was made by a rogue prosecutor who's trying to extricate himself from sexual harassment charges, and by biased judges who are motivated by anti-Semitic sentiments against the one and only Jewish state. These judges did nothing. They did nothing against the real war crimes committed against the millions who've been murdered or uprooted by the dictatorships in Iran, Syria, and Yemen. Instead, they falsely accused the one democracy in the Middle East, Israel, thereby imperiling the right of all democracies to defend themselves against murderous terrorists and tyrants. Nor did the court do anything against the Hamas terrorists who raped our women, beheaded our men, burned babies alive in front of their parents, and kidnapped hundreds of men, women, and children to the underground dungeons of Gaza. They're still holding 101 hostages, citizens of many lands, including the United States. Come to think of it, the court did issue one arrest warrant against Hamas. Now hear this. They issued an arrest warrant against the corpse of the Hamas arch-terrorist Mohammed Dev. His corpse. What an absurdity. No biased anti-Israel decision in The Hague will prevent the State of Israel from defending its citizens. And I want to thank our many friends around the world, especially those in the United States, who've condemned this outrage and who have said that this decision will have severe consequences for the ICC and those who cooperate with its decision. Israel will not recognize the validity of this decision. We will continue to do everything we must do to defend our citizens and defend our state against Iran's axis of terror, Iran and its terrorist proxies, which include Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and others. Our enemies are your enemies, and our victory will be your victory, the victory of civilization over barbarism and tyranny.
Good to see the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu coming up fighting against the ICC. Now, it's extraordinary, isn't it, that the International Criminal Court, that Israel had a big role in helping to establish it in the early 90s, in direct response to the Holocaust of what the Jewish people experienced during the Second World War, particularly in the aftermath as well as of the breakup of the Yugoslavia and the genocides that we saw committed by the Serbs against the Bosnian Muslims in the Balkans back in the early 90s. And this was to bring war crimes against the Serbs and the Serbs leaders. But now we're seeing it's being used as a highly charged political weapon known as lawfare against Israel. Just share with us how shameful it is that the ICC have moved away from its original purpose, and that was to really seek out genuine acts of genocide and genuine acts of war crimes committed by rogue states around the world, not a democratic state that's defending its citizens and also protecting the residents of Gaza from Hamas.
So I think probably one of the most disturbing aspects of all of this, Simon, is that it's undermining its own credibility, the court, and that has an impact in places of the world which badly need a legal response to genuine genocide. And this is going to be one of the, I think, a tremendous tragedy. I believe that the court's overreach in its actions against Israel, both legally and the fact that it has become so politicised, is going to make its standing internationally very weak. No doubt, as we've often said, you begin by against Israel and it never ends. And therefore, I think the Americans are looking at this and thinking, well, they already have an investigation about American troops in Afghanistan. Where's that going to lead? This is going to impact on them. Interestingly, our own government doesn't seem to see it in those terms, and I'm sure you might have some questions about.
Well, I do. Them. I mean, Tony Blair's not immune from this either. I mean, he's been accused of committing war crimes with the Gulf War back in 2003. He could be in The Hague together with former British defence ministers, British generals as well, because once you target Israel, it doesn't stop there. Then the West becomes under threat. So our ability to confront Islamist terrorist organisations and state sponsors like the Iranian regime who sponsor international Islamic terrorist organisations means that this weapon could be used against the West. And so therefore, bringing on to the British government, that's why I think it's absolutely short-sighted and dangerous of the current Labour government, particularly David Lammy, our Foreign Secretary, who announced that he's 100% behind the decision of the ICC to bring about an international arrest warrant for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Hasn't even ruled out the fact that if Benjamin Netanyahu were to fly to London, that he would not be arrested and taken to The Hague in the UK, which is shameful considering our great nation's history with the modern state of Israel, and that Israel is supposed to be one of our closest allies in the Middle East.
Indeed, and interestingly, the French have come out today to make the point about that the International Criminal Court doesn't have any jurisdiction in this matter, and therefore the immunity of the Israeli leadership is intact, and that they would not act in accordance with the arrest warrants. Our own government has prevaricated, it's contradicted itself, it's acted not in this country's best interests. It's trying to balance up the fact that there are large sections of our population who are hostile to Israel. It's trying to maintain engagement and their support rather than the interests of our country and indeed of the West generally, because the terrorists and the Iranians have orchestrated this, and they know that it only requires a terrorist organisation to launch an atrocity, retreat back to its own population, and then what does the country that's been attacked, what will it do? Because it will face the possibility of these kind of legal sanctions. It's deliberate on their part, and it is beyond disgraceful of our government to be not seen to take a robust stance against it.
Yeah. Just going to give you a quote, and a really important article in the Daily Telegraph this week said that Britain would help to ensure the court was able to carry out its work without obstruction. This is according to David Lammy. The remarks appear to raise the prospect of an arrest on British soil. that the UK is jointly responsible for enforcing warrants issued by the court based in The Hague. So share with us how now the Labour Party or the Labour government is now complicit with the ICC against Israel. And surely this has made this nation an enemy of Israel.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely, in the sense that they had an opportunity, like the French, who are...
And the Germans.
And the Germans, and of course the Americans, who've come out very strongly against it. But they've gone a different way, and I think that has consequences, consequences that go deep to this country and where it's heading. And you've mentioned that it's not in our own self-interest, but that's often the case with the impulse and the urge to curse Israel, that it even brings disaster on yourself, spiritually, absolutely, and in every other way. So I don't, I'm sure viewers share with me that this is a very serious moment for the United Kingdom, because, as you say, it is siding with the court, even though the points that I've made about its lack of jurisdiction, not taking into account its own procedures, is an opportunity for the British government to say, no, we're not going to have anything to do with this political decision, and indeed to stand up for international law as opposed to a politicisation of the court. But our government hasn't taken that opportunity. We can all conjecture why that is, and I believe it's a real wrong turning.
And it seems to me that this government is pacifying the hard left within the Labour Party, and also the Islamists within the party, who have a fundamental hatred for Israel. But this also means spiritually, for example, as you know this very well, from Genesis 12, where God gave that incredible promise to Abraham that I will bless those who bless you and I will curse those who curse you. Ever since this government's come into power, it's been determined to curse Israel. And the implications spiritually for our nation are absolutely grave and horrific. Just share with us how our politicians and our ministers, particularly David Lammy, including Keir Starmer, Prime Minister, are on a dangerous collision course, because they're not coming against Israel, but they're coming against the God of Israel.
Well, I think they've been inconsistent, and even in their own terms, sometimes they kind of try and prevaricate, and they try and say one thing to one audience and another thing to another. That is a sign of an unprincipled approach, and I think that lies at the bottom of a lot of this, that they see that there's electoral gain to them by taking a hostile approach, that they think that communities will support them. And you mentioned kind of the hard left. Well, the hard left is still within the Labour Party. Many left it after Corbyn, but it's still an element within the party. It's a faction within the party, so they've got that direct relationship with them. But they're playing a very dangerous game. Yes, we've read the Bible. We know about the nations of the world are going to find Jerusalem the stumbling block, and we know how that ends. So it's a real, I think, turning point for this country. Which way is it going to go? And it doesn't look great, but we've got to do our part as those who can see where this is taking us, to make a stand for Israel at this time.
No, absolutely. I mean, looking at the only kind of ray of light regarding this is the fact that we have a Trump Mark II administration coming into play in January, where Trump will be inaugurated as America's 47th president. And this new administration are determined to bring about sanctions against the International Criminal Court. There's even speculation as well they could issue sanctions on behalf of nations like our nation, the UK, for supporting the ICC, in which Keir Starmer find himself in a very difficult political situation, because we're even seeing that Europe is turning against the ICC, particularly France and Germany, who are the main drivers in the European Union. And he won't have a constituency left apart from the Qataris and maybe the Turks.
Mm-hmm. as our closest ally, that's a thought. Yes, I mean, important to say that even Biden has described the ICC decision as an outrage. So in America, it's bipartisan, and it's just a shame, deep shame that it's not here. So yes, a new president, Trump coming back, he will be, I'm sure, aggressive, and I wouldn't want to be the country that actually collars Prime Minister Netanyahu, because I think the consequences of arresting him on your soil would be huge. I don't believe that Netanyahu will visit London if this is even a possibility, and I think that is a major blow to this country, because we need to engage with Israel if we're going to be taken seriously in the Middle East. So on all scores and all counts, I think the government has let us down on this one.
No, absolutely. And what is your response to how this government is dealing with the issue of anti-Semitism? Is it listening to your community regarding the, I would say, frightening and unprecedented rise in Jew hatred and the attacks against the Jewish community here?
Well, I think there are issues around policing, and that is absolutely the case. The Jewish community is a very loyal community.
Absolutely.
And whenever we have a demonstration, there is always thanks given to the police for protecting us. And it is sad to see that I think from a senior level at policing, decisions have been made not to prosecute incitement and hatred, and very often it is a Jewish person or any person who's standing up against terrorist supporters in our streets who the police will arrest, because that's easier for them than going into a larger mob. So they'll take the easy route of arresting a law-abiding person. So that's one example where the Jewish community's trust and loyalty over many generations is being challenged and tested. It goes deeper than that, I think, and that many in the Jewish community, it's important to say, we're a divided community. We have left, we have right, we have religious, we have secular, and all sorts of opinions. But there is a widespread sense that, is this country safe for us going forward? Will it be safe for our children and grandchildren? How safe is it even in the short term? And that's because we see the violence that's taking place across Europe, in America.
Stephen, share with us how our viewers can take part in a demonstration against Jew hatred that is being planned for December.
So on Sunday the 8th of December, there is going to be a demonstration in central London against anti-Semitism. Last year, over 100,000 people marched. So that's a huge amount from the Jewish community, but also from friends. So I think the website is antisemitism.org, which will give details of the demonstration in central London and an opportunity to register for that.
Stephen, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the Middle East Report today, an absolute masterclass in terms of discussing this very important topic. And I want to thank you for watching this programme at home. We all got to stand against the International Criminal Court, particularly our government's support for it, which is shameful, immoral and wrong. So please continue to stand with Israel and the Jewish community during this difficult time. So thank you for watching this week's edition of the Middle East Report.